Welcome to Cafe 229. Today we have such an honor to have Dr. Frank Diaz to come to share his experiences and findings with us in mindfulness area. Let me introduce Frank a little bit. Frank is a professor at Indiana University Jacobs School of Music, an active scholar and teacher in the field of contemplative science. He's also affiliate faculty for IU Cognitive Science program and is the founder and director of the Institute for Mindfulness-Based Wellness and Pedagogy. At Indiana University, Frank established one of the country's first academic courses focused on mindfulness in teaching and performing arts, and leads several mindfulness initiatives through partnerships with Jacobs School of Music, Lifelong Learning, and the Ashkenazi Museum of Art. Diaz has taught meditative practices to thousands of students through courses and workshops as an educator, a religious and nonprofit institution across the United States. And his work has been featured in media outlets such as CNN, NPR, Science Daily, and the Huffington Post. Frank is also a Hoshi and resident teacher for the Open Mind Zen Sangha of Indiana. So welcome, Frank. It's an honor to have you.
Thank you so much, Joanne. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Your background is a little similar to mine. I'm a musician myself, and I do write a little bit of mindfulness, but not to the level you write. So I'm so happy to have you today. So I'm going to start with getting to know you. How did you get started with your path as both a Buddhist and a secular teacher of mindfulness practices?
Yeah, I think the Buddhist path for me led to the mindfulness path. The two converged a little bit later. I think people always ask me, when did you know you were a Buddhist? And I think I knew before I knew. When I was very young, at around age 12, I remember being very drawn to Buddhist ideas and philosophies and iconography. And so I started meditating when I was 12. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I thought if I sat on a couch for a long time and I kind of stared really hard and concentrated, I would be meditating. But a little later, someone taught me some basic meditation practices. One of my teachers taught me some mindfulness. And a little later, I started working with some of those practices. And I think around age 16, I found a book called Zen Mind Beginner's Mind by Shunryu Suzuki. And I got very serious, and at age 18, started practicing Zen with the Kwanum School. There was a Kwanum school, as Korean Zen, out in Tallahassee, where I was going to school. And I was part of that organization for a long time as a student, studying under Anne Rudlow. And then later on, I decided to start working with my current teacher, Roshi Al Rappaport, Fusho Rappaport, and have been a very serious meditator and a person involved in Buddhist practice for a long time. The mindfulness part of that has been always the meditation part. The skills that I learned through meditation have always have played a large role in the way that I've developed as a musician and as a teacher. And I think I got very serious about using meditation as part of my teaching and music practices. Probably later on in college, and then eventually when I was a public school teacher, I started working with students, trying to experiment to see if there were ways I could teach them to use mindfulness and meditation practices in their own playing and performing and just life. And so that led to a PhD eventually at FSU, where I studied meditation practices as part of my research from a cognitive science perspective. And here I am. So those two paths converged at some point in my life.
Wow. That is wonderful. As a performer myself, I use mindfulness for myself, for performance, as well as teaching my students as well. This is a very similar path that you're taking. That's wonderful.
No, thanks. Yeah.
So I guess now you are not only a teacher, but also a researcher, and you have done quite a bit of the mindfulness and music in the research. What are some good takeaways for folks who are not musicians, as well as for musicians in the mindfulness field?
Yeah. So I think from the research that I've conducted so far, there's been several studies since my initial study back in 2010 having to do with listening and meditation. And, I think generally speaking, what I have found based on the research that I've done is that a few things. I think one takeaway is that there are different kinds of meditation practices and a lot of things that we call mindfulness that are similar and also dissimilar. So one of the things I think I've learned through my work is a lot of what happens to you, a lot of the changes that you experience in meditation really have a lot to do with the kinds of practices that you engage in. And so knowing a little bit about what these practices target experientially really matter, but also that your intention, your framing, the ethical framing of what you do really matters is a lot. And maybe we can get into that discussion later when we talk a little bit more about, where I think the field should lead, as originally speaking, when you look at a Buddhist practice, mindfulness, for the first set of Buddhists was part of the Eightfold Path, right? And it was a way of maintaining ethics and ethical conduct. At least that was a part of it. And I think we've lost sight of that framing, of the ethical framing of mindfulness that emerged from the original Buddha to now. And so I think my takeaways are that it really matters what you practice, and that it really matters what your intention is, and what it is that you want to get out of these practices. That's generally speaking. And I think for musicians, what I've discovered, one of the big takeaways is that mindfulness works pretty well. I think you should, I would recommend it to almost anyone, but I really recommend it for people who have a lot of fear of social I want to say social anxiety, social perfectionism. People who are very, very worried about what other people think about them, or become very nervous in situations where they are being judged, or they feel they're being judged by others. For some reason, mindfulness seems to be really good at mediating that for a lot of folks. And I've learned that through my research, as well as a person who's been teaching it to musicians here at the Jacob School and at the other places I've taught it at.
Totally right. Because I think we are trained to be perfectionists as a musician, and certainly, other than mingling with very competitive musicians around us, we are also on the stage to execute a piece that needs to be perfect, or at least we think it should be perfect.
Sure.
So the mindfulness I think comes to be very handy for all the musicians, and for concentration training, as well as sustained concentration, as well as combating the stage fright, or being judged, that kind of feeling. So you mentioned that the Buddhist side of mindfulness is taking a different path from the psychological framing of mindfulness. So what is the differences to you, and what is your suggestions as where you're coming from, and for for further research?
Yeah, this has been a thorny question, and it is kind of a question that's being debated quite a bit now in the communities that study mindfulness. The psychologists, the neuroscientists, the educators, and the Buddhists, and all the people in between. And I think again, there's no one thing. If you look at the history of the term mindfulness, and the definitions, there's not one thing that we can really call mindfulness. There's several types. John Dunn writes a little bit about this out at the Center for Healthy Minds. He has a really wonderful article about Buddhist types of mindfulness, and there's non-dual mindfulness. There's traditional classical mindfulness. So I'm not saying there's one right way to do it. I think that people can interpret the practice a lot of different ways. But I say one of the biggest differences is, again, getting back to the ethics and the framing. Mindfulness in the Buddhist path, in almost any kind of Buddhist iteration of it, has an implicit, actually explicit set of values. So, if you, to bring that home, I practice mindfulness because it gives me insight into the nature of my own mind. And by having insight into the nature of my own mind, I learn to act and think and behave in ways that are aligned with some fundamental truths from the Buddhist perspective. The impermanence, interdependence, and insight, wisdom that comes from that, right? And that's a deeply philosophical thing, and it changes our behavior and it changes our view of reality, or maybe as a Buddhist I might say it reveals what reality might be to us in a conventional sense. But when we're talking in psychological framings of mindfulness, it really goes in a lot of different directions. There's dispositional mindfulness. There's mindfulness that's practiced that is a sort of state that you can develop. There's mindfulness that develops concentration. There's all kinds, and there's also, of course, the classical mindfulness-based stress reduction that was developed by Jon Kabat-Zinn in this country, which is an incredibly popular practice. And the thing there is, at least for MBSR, I think there is an ethical framing. It's not explicit, it's implicit. Sometimes when you read his books or you talk to folks who do that, reduction of suffering is still implied in what you're doing. You're trying to be in the moment and communicate with others and build relationships that are mindful, which in the end are really about facing reality the way that it is and developing a sort of soberness about it that may reduce your own suffering. It is called stress reduction, right? So obviously it's called stress addition. And then then there's, of course, but that's not always clear among psychologists, and that's not always explained. So, for example, there's research now that looks at how mindfulness helps people concentrate better, which I think is wonderful, and maybe get you better at sports and maybe get you better at music. But I always wonder, if the Buddha were here right now and somebody told him, hey, this ancient practice that you spoke about, that you developed, now we do it to play the piano better. I wonder what he would say. I wonder what the community of bhikkhus that were around him would say. And again, it's not to say that mindfulness has to be religious or framed in a Buddhist way, but I think it has to certainly be framed in an ethical way. And actually, part of what I have found in my research is if it isn't framed this way, I'm not sure it's entirely effective. I'm not sure it actually does what we want it to do. So just simply meditating without having an intentional framing around it might not be as effective as we think it is. And that's an underexplored part of it, I think.
I totally agree with you. Okay? Well, I happen to be in the Mind and Life conference the past weekend, and I also met John Dunn, and Jon Kabat-Zinn was leading mindfulness meditations right before the election. So it's very much needed
yes, of course,
for all of us. And yes, I hear you. Because I also teach at a public college. My constant struggle is to, trying to teach them implicitly, but the leaving out this ethical part, as you just mentioned, is always a struggle for me. I'm sure Buddha didn't, develop that method just for us to cultivate our skills. So what's the method that, or how do you see the effectiveness that you related to your music students in mindfulness outside the Buddhist context? What's the approach?
Yeah, that's the great challenge, right? And I'm not saying that I have the perfect approach. I think I'm still working on it. So here's a few thoughts about that. The one thing I do ask is, so in my class, I teach a 16-week class on mindfulness for musicians. Actually, they're enrolling right now for the spring class, and it's a really interesting class. I get performers, educators, theorists, musicologists, a nice mix of people. And one of the things I start off with right away is I ask them, what do you expect to get out of this class? What do you expect to get out of these practices? What are you dealing with that has drawn you to this practice? What are some strengths that you have? I ask, without saying there is, an ethical framing here. I'm trying to figure out if they have an ethical framing already about, a set of values that they want to live in their life. And, and then as we go through the practices, one of the things that we do is we talk about, So let's talk about something like a breath awareness practice. Let's talk about the psychological components. Of course, breath awareness, you can look at it from a psychological perspective. It narrows the range of focus. It sustains your attention. That might have some biophysiological things, but then I ask, for what end? What is the purpose? And that's when it gets really interesting, because it can go from anything to, I want to play the piano better and I want to concentrate better, to I really want to attend to my family better, or I want to be more present in my life, right? And then we go deeper. Well, why do you want to be more present in your life? And then it basically gets down to, when you really dig deeper, what they want to, almost all of them want to stop or at least reduce their suffering. Right? But they're not but just, there's so many ways that human beings suffer. Of course, again, as Buddhists, we have a certain belief about what causes suffering from a sort of, from the perspective of the Dharma. And that might, I might have a student in my class who's a Christian, a Jew, a Muslim, atheist, spiritual, so it's really important for them to realize these practices without that framing are, it's like I can lift weights because I want my bicep to grow, or I can lift weights because I'm training for a marathon, or I can lift weights because I want to be a better football player. The lifting of the weights, it's fine, but it's going to probably be more effective and easier for you to incorporate into your life if you understand why you're doing it. At the same time, though, Joanne, I also say let go of your expectations. Don't be too expectant about, because sometimes things develop. You learn about yourself. Mindfulness is self-inquiry, right? And so sometimes we start with one set of ethical principles or ideas or goals, and then that changes as we go through these practices, because we learn more about ourselves and our relationships to the world and how we view things and label things. So I would just say keeping that central. It doesn't have to be Buddhist based, but keeping the ethical framing central to what we do, I think makes a big difference, or at least I feel it has made a big difference to my students.
That is a great learning tips that I got from you. So getting into the meanings behind what they do, and also more like deeper asking themselves, and also expanding the mindfulness into daily lives, not just in their practice and in their studies. Okay, that is a great tip. And also you really spend time to find out what are their ethics, so you can find a common ground. So it's not your method to find a common ground in everyone's beliefs and extend that with mindfulness technique.
Yeah, or maybe I think that's right. I think I would say probably that there's a general sense in the class that we are practicing mindfulness for the purposes of insight and for pro-sociality. We want to perhaps be kinder, perhaps more compassionate to ourselves and others. We have sort of general things we all agree on that are beyond Buddhist ethics or Christian ethics or even secular, right? We have that. And then individually, what do you have? I have Christian students in my class who feel mindfulness gets them closer to God. I have students, it's a very interesting thing to speak to them and say, this is a way that I silence my busy mind and connect to my deeper spirituality. And as a teacher, I have to be careful because we're in a secular institution, of course, and I'm not trying to promote any particular religious set of values. But I think it's folly to say that we're not promoting an ethical context. And to me, let's at least be explicit about it. I mean, universities have ethics that we, even if we're secular, we have humanistic ethics. Actually, I think we actually have a lot of Judeo-Christian ethics that we just call ethics or values without exploring, where they come from. We have philosophical ethics. So I think just being explicit and respectful about what people bring, and also being prepared to say some practices might not be good for you. Some practices might violate your ethical norms and might not be something that you want to do, and giving our students the leeway to say, you know what, that's okay. Don't do that one. Or let's talk about framing it differently. So that can be really complex and it's tricky and messy, but I feel it's been very effective, I think.
Wow. I admire the courage to I assume your students know you are a Buddhist.
Yes, I tell them. I tell them right off the bat, because I want to make sure they know that. And actually tell them, please let me know when I've gotten Buddhist instead of just as your professor. I said, I don't want to preach Buddhism at you, right? But you should know that, because I'm not going to pretend to be, a neutral, I have no ethical, of course I'm trying to teach it in a secular way, but I'm human. And some things are probably going to get through there that I don't think are a problem, but might be a problem for some of my students. So we have candor and openness about it.
Okay. Oh, I admire that. That's something I need to work on, because I'm kind of not so comfortable sharing that part. I just simply teach them mindfulness and hoping the inside part will be coming the next after they really show their interest.
Sure.
So that leads to my next question. So what are the examples or your success and the failures in teaching the mindfulness to your university students?
Yeah.
What do they get from it, and what is your class like?
Sure. Let me start with the failures, because I think those are really informative. I think, it took me a while. What I'm speaking about today is sort of the thing today. Is it took me a while to realize that not not everybody thinks of mindfulness the same way. That some people are very interested in parts of it, but not all of it. Some people have different definitions. That we actually do have to be careful about not mixing religion and secular ideas. That students should, probably should have a great deal of flexibility about what they should be able to do and want to do in a class. That we shouldn't be psychotherapists. That we have to be really careful to explain to our students that we're not therapists, we're not psychological professionals in that sense. So all the things I'm mentioning are places of tension in the last 5 years or so of teaching, actually now 6 years of teaching mindfulness at an institution of higher learning, where I've had to go, I have to change my approach. So these failures have been in not understanding that we have to be really clear about what we're doing. We have to give leeway to students to make meaning out of what we're doing and not impose meaning on what it is. So being very careful with that line. I think those have been the failures. We also have a failure, I think, in mindfulness to communicate what it is that we're doing to some people. And so it was really hard to communicate with religious scholars at my school that were like, no, you can't teach that. What are you doing? And actually, there was one prominent religious scholar at my school that tried to had a good conversation about my class with me, which I learned a lot about her particular concerns, and they were very valuable. Successes. So the successes have been very much in allowing students the opportunity to seek meaning through self-inquiry. There's so few classes. So if you take a philosophy course at a university, a lot of philosophy courses are very much about the method, the ideas, the structures, right? And that's wonderful. You sort of take you separate yourself from it, if at all possible, and don't get involved in living the practices and ideas that are often taught in these philosophical courses. Mindfulness is interesting because it has philosophical components, but it also is a way of making meaning. It's a way of students to explore their lives. They're very hungry for that. And they're very hungry to do it in a way that either provides a framing for their search of meaning in their lives, or helps them reconnect to something fundamentally missing in them. I mean, maybe that's a way of saying the same thing. So, I get the successes have been kids who come back and say, I thought I was going to learn how to have stress reduction in this class. And maybe I got a little bit of that. Maybe I focused better. But I really started to question how I'm living my life, the kinds of choices I'm making about my health, about how I treat others, about how I approach my profession, how I approach my art, and more importantly, how I treat myself. And so this class that became very much about mental well-being has really become a 16-week course about really looking deeply and compassionately at your life and your thinking and your experiences, and giving yourself enough distance to say, can I change this? Can I live a life that is healthier and more aligned with my values? And that's been really fruitful, and that has led to some, I think, significant changes among some of our students.
Wow. They must really have a lot to take home with. I remember, certain things my professor said when I was a student, and I still live with it. It sounds like you give them a lot of wonderful tips that they can further grow and develop themselves. That is amazing. So I guess, that leads to my, my thinking about how do you balance being to teach the Buddhist part and also the secular meditative practices.
Yeah.
What is the challenges and opportunities do you have encountered that you try to balance those two?
That's a great question. And one of the things that I'll start with is just I try to be fully transparent with my students. I think I mentioned that before. Everybody knows what my background is. I don't try to hide it. I don't want anybody to go out there and say Frank is trying to do stealth dharma in his class. That bothers me because I've always told people it does not matter to me one iota whether you want to be a Buddhist or not, or if you ever, it doesn't matter to me. I think, most Buddhists are neutral about, you want to come meditate with us? Great. You want to be a Buddhist? Great. You want to be a particular type of great. I think we're mostly fundamentally concerned with what? The alleviation of suffering. I mean, I think that's fundamental to most Buddhist practices, right? Insight and is insight, wisdom, and compassion, right? Okay, so I think being transparent is part of it. But one way I balance this is that I've had to think very deeply and carefully about what are the elements of all of the different types of ideas about mindfulness that are trainable. So in other words, are there things psychologically that we can find some grounding in? And I think there are. No matter what kind of mindfulness you do, there is some training in attention. There is some work on refining the ability to sustain attention on an object or in a particular environment. And that's psychological, and that's also what? That's also a neurological thing we can trace. We can look at the correlates of that in neuroscience. The second thing is awareness, right? So how aware are we of our mental state, our physical state, our physiological state? So our ability to monitor our experience, that's a way of teaching. So we learn how to focus on things in our experience, but we also learn to monitor our experience, right? And that's I think in the model that I use, psychological model, I call it meta-awareness, which comes from the psychological literature. The third is neutral disposition, right? It's just being able to maintain equanimity. That's what I would call it, but at least not being, trying to look at things without getting too, noticing your emotion, but not being attached to your emotion in a way, or attached to a particular way of framing it as negative or positive. And then finally, de-reification, the ability to let go of the stickiness of thoughts and ideas about how the world is, suspending that your thoughts are, what do I always say? Your thoughts are real, but they're not necessarily true. Your experience is not true. So you take those four things, right? You take attention, awareness, de-reification or letting go, and neutral affect, right? And that builds that sets a foundation up for teaching all sorts of practices, right? Mm-hmm. And really what changes is what is the intention that individual has for doing these practices, and is that going to be cultivated by using these particular, I always think of it as the mindfulness soup. Those four things are part of the soup. It's like potatoes and leeks and water. I can change the configuration of the soup, but it's still a soup.
Yes.
Right? It still has fundamental things. What I love about those four things is that you can find psychological, you can teach those things to people. People experience them. People can report on them. You can look at it psychologically and find Western psychological ideas that correspond to that. And you can look at it from a neuroscientific or scientific perspective and see networks of brain activity that correlate with those. So it's an expansive view. It's not mine. I adapted it from a model that was developed by Cliff Sarin, Amishi Jha, Antoine Lutz, and John Dunn. That they published in 2015. It's stolen from them, but it works really well with respect to teaching and framing mindfulness in those ways. I don't know if that's even what you asked me, Joanne, but it sounds like fun to talk about.
Well, each question is all interconnected. You naturally lead to my next question, because I think it's all overall as a holistic approach to learn mindfulness and to educate your students and our students. I think I hear that there's a fine line between a Buddhist teacher and there's secular person teaching the mindfulness, as well as we want to care for our students, listen to them, but not becoming a psychotherapist. There's always like two different fine lines not to cross over, and that takes a lot of experiences. I really would love to speak to you more later on.
I'm sure you have plenty of experience yourself.
I do. I would love to learn and talk to you more about this. So we have talked about all the, from different perspectives. How about as a musician? How does mindfulness inform what and how you practice and perform? This might be our last question before we
Sure.
fold.
Yeah. So for me as a musician, I think, it started off with just being able to deal with my stress, right? It started off with me being able to manage the internal dialogue that was going on in my head, the perfectionistic dialogue. And so it started with me going, no, that I'm talking to myself, but that voice is just part of who I am, and it's scared. And I was able to step back from that and not identify with it. That, of course, helped my physiology, right? Then I could focus on my breathing, my physiology changed, my attention changed. But as I have got also awareness, right? Like my ability when my meta awareness is highly developed in a practice, it helps me understand what's going on around me and be responsive as a musician. So in chamber music settings, as a conductor, it's, I think those skills transfer. But I will have to say that what has happened to me the most lately with my practice, both my Zen practice and my practice as a secular mindfulness, psychological, whatever you want to call it, is I've learned that myself, it has taught me that myself isn't the fixed thing. It's a process, and it's a process that's being created and maintained by my own ideas and by my environment. And when I can loosen that a little bit, when I can let go of the tight grip of self, then I make music better. I connect to the people around me better. It's a much more relational, social, healthy process when I'm not so caught up in me, right? And so as a musician, mindfulness helps to remind me that this is a very interconnected experience, that music is what is happening when all of us engage in these practices together, but that not one of us individually carries the load. That we create this musical experience, and the musical experience feeds back on us, and it's very process oriented and very awareness oriented, and that's a really special thing. I think it gets into ideas of flow that the Csikszentmihalyi talks about, and to me, as a Zen teacher, I always say, it's not about the effort, it's about right effort, and right effort to me in these situations is letting go. It's letting go and staying aware, and it's sort of allowing our natural I would, of course, call it Buddha mind to permeate, and that wisdom to permeate. But maybe a better way to say it is to let, if Buddha mind isn't your thing, then allowing sort of your innate intelligence and wisdom to take over, which uses your ego and uses yourself, but doesn't depend on it as the center of your experience.
Wow. I can tell you are a true practitioner. The Buddhist practice in such a secular way, and pass that Dharma to your students so naturally. Your students are very fortunate to have you.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind.
Okay, thank you so much, Frank, for your for the conversation and sharing. Now we are going to move on to our Q&A session. I'm going to look at the questions now and see what questions we have from our audience. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. All right, so here I am looking at this the web now. I have a first question, Frank. Mindfulness soup is a great concept. What kinds of ethical activities do you encourage your students to engage in beyond the classrooms? Can you share some stories related to what they do, please?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So there are a lot of things that we do in this class, this mindfulness class specifically, that engages the students in a sort of world experience. In other words, taking what they learn in that classroom and embedding it into some kind of personal context or musical context or whatever context they end up wanting to pursue. Teaching, for example, is another one. So one example might be, we start the class by teaching students, how it is that they process difficult situations, musical situations. So for example, I might give them an informal teaching where we're practicing just noticing our thoughts. And I'll say, next time you walk, this week's assignment is next time you walk into a practice room, just pause for a minute. And before you engage with your instrument, just notice your inner narrative. Just notice your inner narrative. What is your mind saying to you at that moment? Is it saying, "Oh, this is great. I can't wait to practice," or is it, or is your mind saying, "Oh, this is terrible," or "Oh my goodness, I want to practice, but maybe later," or "Oh, if I do this, I'm going to mess up." Whatever it might be, and just pause for a minute and say, "Is the thought that I'm having right now, whether it's true or not, is it useful for this moment?" In other words. And what I mean by ethics in this situation is, am I treating myself kindly? If the thinking and the processing at that moment is self-defeating, do I have enough awareness, mindful awareness, to notice that it's entering that situation without me being conscious of it necessarily? Am I taking it seriously and saying this is the absolute truth, where it could just be a mood or an idea that I had before I walked in there, and then can I disengage from that? So that's sort of in a musical context, but in an interpersonal context, one practice that I think is really lovely is bringing attention to gratitude. So sometime in the class, one of the things that we do, we take an idea from, I don't remember who the professor is, but we stole it from Berkeley Greater Good Center, and it's writing a gratitude letter. So towards the end of the semester, they write a letter to somebody that did something wonderful for them or really helped them in some way. And the point of it is to bring attention, sort of the same way we do this when we set intentions in mindfulness practice. Like if we do a meta practice, right, which isn't strictly mindfulness, but we do a mindfulness practice, we set an intention, right? We generate a particular feeling, and in our minds, we imagine sending that out to somebody. Well, that changes our behavior, right? It changes what we're focused on at that moment. And so the gratitude practice kind of uses similar mechanisms, I think, in that it brings attention to something that is worth having gratitude about. And almost anyone can find something in their lives that they can be grateful for. And when you write it about somebody else, it changes what you do. So, I think in a sense, maybe not ethical, but it's certainly about values and pro-social values and positive values. But the ethical concerns in general are always about noticing the way your mind and your mood and your history play into situations where you interact with other human beings. So we talk a lot about, when you're teaching, what are you bringing to that situation? If your intention is to be kind and open, are you bringing a mindset? Or are you bringing an experience into that situation is not going to be conducive to that? So if you do notice that, what can you do? And often we have more choice. I can be grumpy, but I don't want to necessarily infect my student with my grumpiness. I can say, I'm grumpy, it's not you. Or I can say, I can let that go for right now and really be present with this person that I'm here with. It's always 3 ways of doing that.
That's a great awareness. So I took home two. One is pause before you enter your practice or enter teaching, and the other one is having students and us, writing a gratefulness letter great gratitude letter. That's wonderful. I think one time I shared with my mindfulness club students, and they were like, oh. Sometimes I notice my student, my faculty, and my teachers saying things, and then they are not in a like a grumpy mood, you said. So I think it's a mutual understanding that we are aware of others' moods, and we're trying to dilute it or not taking within too much of it if it's a negative one. That's great. Okay,
Yeah.
so Frank, sorry, I'm gonna carry on because you have quite a few questions
Oh,
here
great. Fantastic.
on YouTube. Yes. Hi, Dr. Diaz. How do you teach mindfulness now under COVID-19 restrictions? Does connecting digitally hinder or change your success?
Well, that's a tough one. So last year we were meeting live and the pandemic hit, so we had to go online. So the mindfulness class transferred online. And, that's a big class. Last year we had about 59, 60 enrolled in that classroom. So it's a big classroom. And I like to walk around the human connection part's so important. When the students come in and they're quiet they know they come in quiet. I'm usually sitting in the front. I begin the class with a simple mindfulness exercise. I ask them to engage in their intention. And there's something about that human presence, being in a room like that, that's really powerful. So as soon as the pandemic hit, all we could do was go on Zoom, you know. And one of the things that happened right away that was really difficult was that people don't turn their cameras on for various reasons. People are in different parts of the world, so we lost a little bit of that interconnectivity that we have. That is, I think, so critical to mindfulness practice. I know it's not talked about a lot, but I do have to say, I just think that's so critical. The group practice, the way we hold space for each other in a group, is a powerful part of this practice that enhances it and perhaps even drives it in a way that individual practice can't. So right now we just started again. The class is back up. It's all online. And it's, again, we're in the high 50s. We have a good number. Is it going well? I think so. And here's why. You get to go to class once a week, and we have a guided meditation, and there's somebody there to tell you it's okay not to be okay. I'm going to give you some tools. I'm not going to invalidate your experience. And I think there's something, even now, even online, it's very powerful. Is it as good as a face-to-face class? That remains to be seen. But I do think it continues to be powerful for students. Immediately after we had that first class, I had several emails. Thank you so much. I needed that. It's been a long year. I'm so glad this class is going on. And so, I think they're appreciating it, even if the format is a little bit different.
I think that's great. I went to a retreat over the Christmas time, and I actually was able to relax more, because every time you go physically into a new area, there's new pillow, new bed, new environment. It kind of brings up your anxiety level. But being home and sleeping on your own bed actually relaxes you more. So actually, I had a better meditation retreat than before. So I can understand it still works, but in different ways that we probably cannot see as much in person or online. I think I agree with you. That's a great input there, Frank. Okay, so the next question I have here is, in your opinion, what are some fundamental differences between modern psychological framing of mindfulness and those are developed in the Buddhist setting? We might have touched that a little bit in the questions, unless you have more to add, Frank.
Yeah, I don't know how much of the video actually got to play a little earlier, but it's good to revisit, because I think there's a simple way to say it. If you look at it from a psychological perspective, in other words, if you see what is going on during a mindfulness practice, I think there is vocabulary in modern psychology to talk about the processes that are going on. We have words for them: attention, awareness, de-reification or letting go, decentering, intention, mood, all those things we can talk about in a psychological setting. I don't think that the Buddha or the folks or the bhikkhus that were around them were engaging in a different set of psychological processes, actually, or embodied practices. I think we're humans, right? So our brains work in a particular way. But what is very different, I think, is the ethical underpinning. Buddhist practice was, mindfulness is part of the Eightfold Path in Buddhism. And even if it changes depending upon the tradition, because it does change, we know that, the underlying point of engaging in mindfulness is to support your Buddhist practice if you're a Buddhist. That means ethical action, compassion, insight, wisdom. All mindfulness supports all of that to some degree or the other, depending upon what tradition you're in. In modern psychological conceptions of mindfulness, that what we might call soteriological framework or ethical framework or axiological, for all those frameworks that have to do with value and salvation and reducing suffering, they aren't as clear, or they're not there. So I think we talk about mindfulness as though it's just going to happen if we do these practices without framing it in an ethical context from a psychological perspective. But as I said before, I think that's my main concern. I'm not entirely sure that people who practice mindfulness that don't have an ethical framing sure, you can focus better, but for what purpose? You're more aware of your emotions, but what are you going to do with that? Are you going to now say, well, okay, now, great, I'm angry. but what are you going to do with that? You know, and sometimes we don't let go of our anger. You know, sometimes the anger is well justified. And so without an ethical framing, we can't make those choices, at least. And I think that's tricky in modern psychological concepts of framings of mindfulness, because we don't want to give anybody an ethical framework as we're afraid. You know, we live in a secular, open, pluralistic society. And I just think that's a mistake. We do have some common values. Most of us value pro-sociality and kindness and compassion. I don't think that's religious. It doesn't have to be. And that's sort of John Kabat-Zinn's universal concept of Dharma as not necessarily a religion, but as truth, right? That he talks about in his conception of mindfulness. So yeah, I think those are the differences. But psychologically, I think they're essentially, I think, the same as far as we can tell, or at least very closely related. They're parallel. That wasn't any shorter, was it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think without ethical backbone, it's actually a protection for ourselves, not just to others, but for ourselves, because we are all interconnected, as you mentioned earlier. So, you know, harming others is harming ourselves. You know, it will eventually, what goes around comes around, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Very good. Okay, so a couple more questions.
Sure.
Okay. Again, I wasn't sure how much it was played. Despite the differences, do you believe there is a common ground to approaches to mindfulness? Common grounds in, I guess, different disciplines or different aspects of the lives. I guess that's what he meant.
Yeah, I
Or
think we might have answered that in the last question.
yes,
Yeah, the common ground, I think, are the psychological processes. I think for sure that's a common ground. The
Okay.
ethical framings are certainly different. Maybe not as different as we think, but yeah, there's some common ground to both approaches. But you know, it's gotten so complicated. There's so many different kinds of ideas of what mindfulness is now that it becomes harder and harder to figure out what they have in common. And I think, you know, I, as a Buddhist practitioner and as a secular mindfulness practitioner, part of my, I think, quest is to try to find common ground as much as I can, and also realizing that, you know, it's not going to line up perfectly. Yeah, that's not the point. And by the way, it never did. in the article that John Dunn wrote, Heuristics, I think, Buddhist styles of mindfulness, it's a great history where you look at that even Buddhists didn't agree with each other about what mindfulness was. Each tradition looked at it very differently. So to find an essential mindfulness, I think we'd have to get the Buddha back here again. And of course, you know, if, Buddha is everywhere. So, you know, he or she, or he's already here, but probably not communicating in the same way, right? So I think we do the best we can.
Great. Wonderful. Yes, I agree with you. Next person, we have a question. How do we generate gratitude and compassion in our current time when the society is so divided with conflicting views? Oh, this is a good question.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this is a question I have to bring up a lot in class when we talk about compassion, and also, you know, within my you know, as a Dharma teacher with my Zen Sangha. So how I do it personally, how I interpret this is, we are all susceptible to delusion and suffering. Bottom line, do I want to find a commonality with you? I can find a commonality with any human by realizing that we all suffer. It doesn't matter what my political views are, or my religious views are, or even my ethics and my actions. Even if you try the hardest that you can, you know, the Bodhisattva vow, for example, is an impossible vow. The point is not that you're going to liberate all beings from suffering. You can't. The point is that you're going to try, that it is part of being human and being alive to enact this, even if ultimately it might not ever resolve itself, right? We never not find that in a human incarnation in some way. So I start by reminding myself that I am as deluded as other human beings. And the part of my practice as a Buddhist is to say, how am I deluded today? How am I deluded right now? How do I check in with that? And what's the best that I can do, knowing that delusion is part of life? It's part of what we do, right? So I can find that commonality. And the second thing is, despite what I might think of somebody else, they're suffering also. And so by reducing their suffering, by trying to work with them in the best way that I can, I reduce my own suffering and the suffering of others. You can't separate your own. There is no compassion, and there is no that doesn't exist when we fail to realize that we're interconnected. So I can't divide myself from somebody else and say, well, I'm being compassionate and they're not, and so I'm going to ignore them. I have to bring them to that view in some way or the other, or at least project that onto them as is reasonable. Otherwise, what's the ultimate end? This is it to divide society further? Because I don't think we're going to get to a point where we all agree on everything. It's just not going to when has that ever happened in human history?
Exactly.
So I mean, that's an imperfect question, answer to a really difficult question, but it's what drives me and what keeps me humble about my own views and my own sense of I don't want to get, what is it called, sort of kind of Buddhist superiority or exceptionalism, because I practice that, oh, I am so compassionate, unlike all those other people. I'm so less deluded than everyone else.
Yeah. Well, certainly our goal is not to create a bigger ego.
No, exactly.
Us, right?
Exactly.
That's a good point. Very good. Keep trying, huh? All right. So the next question is, it's great to hear you talk about the gratitude practice. Gratitude, respect, and love is the heart of Tzu Chi Foundation's value. What is your most challenging moment teaching mindfulness?
Oh, there's so many challenging moments. When the practice is entered into honestly and with a sense of vulnerability, what is very difficult to see as a teacher is when human beings realize that the ego and the self that they have created and put together is much more effervescent and porous than they imagined. And so the first thing is sometimes you see people really suffer a lot when they realize that they've enacted a world and a life that they haven't explored very much, and that they're shamed about, or that or they've harmed other people because of particular mental habits or ways of thinking, or they've internalized things. So it's just seeing people come to terms with, wow, I've been covering up a lot of suffering. And that's really difficult. And that happens when people practice for a while. It's kind of a dark night, right? And then the next part, which is even harder, is to realize, okay, so that means in order to get through this, I have to acknowledge that whatever I've constructed, whatever has been constructed as my ego, has to fall apart in a way, to come back together in a more whole way, in a way that's better connected, that understands its role in the larger scheme of things. And so that transition is really difficult. It's just so difficult. And it takes a lot of skill and care and compassion, because you never want to invalidate anyone's experience. You want them to be able to see it. And so that insight can emerge from that experience, and that they, either you can help them, or they can help themselves, or you can help them help themselves, right? And say, this is beyond me. You should go to a therapist, or, this is okay. I can hold you and support you here. So I think that's not one moment, but I've seen those moments happen a lot with students, where they really break through and realize, oh my gosh, what have I been doing all my life? And now I have to, it's scary to let go of that identity a little bit of whatever it was. Letting go of our identities is so difficult, right? Mm-hmm. Especially for people who've been very harmed and who need to build an identity. And, you can't even build one. You can't, make it porous if you've never built one, right? So mm-hmm. Some people need actually to build up their ego a little bit more and stabilize it and make clear, create clear boundaries, right? And yes. So this is a really difficult thing for folks if you take the practice seriously.
Mm-hmm. I think, I've heard psychologists said you have to build a healthy ego in order to let go what it is.
Yes.
If you don't even have a complete and more like a healthy one, you don't even know what to get rid of, right?
Right.
Yeah, I think it's so self-understanding, self-development is certainly part of the path to let go. I think that's a great point, Frank, there. All right. My next question here is, your audience loves about your talk regarding delusion. So one more question, how do you integrate the volunteer work with mindfulness practice seamlessly?
Seamlessly. Let's see. So, I try to frame. So is this? I'm sorry. So for me personally, last question: do we integrate volunteer? How do we integrate volunteer work with mindless practicing? Okay, got it. I understand now. I'm seeing the question on the side too. Boy, I don't think anything is seamless, but I'll say this. I think if you give people the opportunity to find their heart in this practice, I always feel like it should really be called heartfulness instead of mindfulness. They're going to want to do things for other people, and who knows what that's going to be. So like volunteer work, I have people in my Sangha and among the students that I teach secular mindfulness who all of a sudden want to help other people. It just kind of emerges from the practice. When they see how much they're suffering, sometimes they're like, gosh, that means other people probably could use help. And actually they realize that's one of the best ways to reduce their own suffering is to help other people. So the seamless quality is, I think it has to come from that person. It's not about giving them a particular set of outcomes. This is the way it's going to show up, but saying what really drives you. And for some people, it's honestly, all they can do is, I like to write poems for people. And so that's my volunteer work. Or I like to teach art, or I want to volunteer in my community. Or who knows, right? They find something that they can do that's tangible and doable. And that leads to a sort of heart that leads to volunteer work, because they're not, certainly not the majority of the folks that I work with in my mindfulness class are not Buddhist necessarily. They might be Christian. They might just be good human beings. They might be, and almost anybody who wants to be a decent human being is going to want to volunteer to do something.
Sure.
Now, of course, in the Sangha, it's a little different because we do have particular ways of engaging in the world that, are traditional from the perspective of Buddhism and the way that we alleviate suffering. But Zuchi, right? Look at your organization. It does a lot of stuff. That bodhisattva ideal is there, and it manifests in so many ways: education, healthcare. I mean, it's everywhere, right? So I think it's a similar process, I think, when you're working with other folks.
Yes, that's wonderful. I thank you for the comments on Tzu Chi. I think we try our best from different, perspectives and over different talents that we all have. I guess, Frank, I do have one question from myself.
Sure, absolutely.
As a musician, I'm curious how mindfulness has guided you all the way through your development into, from a student to, a teacher and now a researcher, and you've been doing so many different things as a mindfulness teacher and also Zen practitioners and a researcher and performers and a conductor in your field. How does it guide you all the way? How does it help you to develop yourself? I'm just interested in the overall growth.
Yeah. Oh gosh, a great all these questions are really hard to answer at the moment, but I'll try my best. I think what mindfulness has done for me is, it's similar to what I said before in my development, as in all those things, is that it reminds me again that I'm embedded in a larger process, right? I'm a little spoke in a giant turning wheel of things, right? I'm just this little, and I certainly affect my environment, but it affects me. And so it's all relational. It never stays steady. So my mindfulness practice has taught me a few things. One is keep beginner's mind. Actually, it's a very Zen thing, keep beginner's mind. I don't know what's going to happen from today to tomorrow. I don't know. Everything changes so quickly. My interests change. My ability to help people changes. My circumstances change. So in a world that's constantly changing, what is the sane response? And to me, the sane response, what mindfulness has helped me do, is look at what's going on right now, not what I think is going to happen 20 years from now, or not my past, but look at it right now and say, what does the world need from me at this moment? How can I be of value, of use to other people? And I find that when I answer that question with insight, whatever it is that I'm doing at that moment, it is helping others, and it's helping develop me at the same time. So sometimes I focus more on being a conductor or a researcher or a teacher or whatever it might be. Whatever I'm doing at that moment is really, really important, right? But I'm keeping an open mind to see how that development is a response to the moment and not a response to what I think is going to happen.
Okay.
So it's about being present, right? It's about right now, this is, we say this a lot in Zen, right now, this is it.
Yes.
Right, this is it, this moment right now, what is the best response that I can give? Because it doesn't always go as planned. And we can hold on to models of the past and the future and who we should be and what we're going to do and what are, and who, but it's, I mean, fundamentally, it's all very mysterious, isn't it?
Yes.
We're self-aware creatures in a vastly complex universe that we barely understand. And we could either be terrified by that, or we can say, that's amazing. What's in store for me today? And also realize that what's in store for me today sometimes can be very difficult and unfair and hard, but that I'm alive, right? I'm alive. I have this opportunity right now to practice every moment. So that's how mindfulness has guided me in all those activities. What do I need right now?
Great. And hopefully we're doing the right thing. Because sometimes I reflect back, I'm like, I hope I did it right.
Oh
Right?
yeah, of course. Yeah.
That's you know, we all have some doubts in ourselves, but as long as we live the best every moment of it, then you know, then there isn't a lot more that we have to worry and look back and think, oh, that wasn't, you know, the best or something.
Yeah. Trying to live with less
Wonderful.
regret, right?
Yes.
Less regret. And that's hard. Of course, it's not, you know, it's one of the things I mentioned during that short little, well, it's probably too long, is I know when it's gone. I only know if it's gone well afterwards, because it aligns, you know, it something works out. And then sometimes I go, well, it didn't really work out. I probably did the wrong thing in that situation, you know, and now I've learned, let's not do that again. You know, let's learn from those mistakes. So that you're not stuck in the past. You're thinking about how to move forward.
Definitely. You mentioned that comfortable with uncertainties, right?
Yes.
That's also Pema Children's one of his her titles book.
Yes.
Just one last question from me again, and then we'll wrap it up soon.
Sure.
So how do you balance being wearing so many hats?
I don't. Oh, sorry. I wish I could give you a better answer. Sometimes I wake up in the morning and go, why am I doing so many things? You know, the truth is, you know, I don't know. I really don't know. I suppose what keeps me balanced is gratefulness, right? And it really is. I am a poor, I mean, I'm an immigrant kid that came to this country with a very poor family. There was, you know, 8 of us living in a 2-bedroom apartment. None of us spoke English. You know, we had one truck, and through the kindness and grace of many people, and through, to me personally, the discovery of the Dharma in my life, I am blessed beyond belief at this moment. I am healthy. I have a lovely family. I have a job, and all these little things that I do help or affect other people in some way. And maybe I don't do them all perfectly or great, but they do make a difference in people's lives. And the, you know, the balance for me is, the hard part is trying to remember that, there are things that you should prioritize at certain times in your life. You know, I have an 8-year-old daughter, right? So,
Yes.
I can't do all those things all the time very well, and I give some of them up. But there's the other side, which is, wow, not bad. What a blessed life. What a lucky life from somebody who didn't have much. And by the way, I don't mean that in the sense of, oh, look how lucky I am. I'm financially, no, it's, I have the opportunity to help, right? Like, what a wonderful thing that I have at least some abilities in those areas to bring something helpful or useful to people who want to do that. So that keeps me going. But I'm going to get older. And at some point, I think I've told people my retirement dream is like retire at 65, open up a Zendo, and just, you know, just basically do that. You know, so I've got to make enough money before I'm 65 to support myself as a Zen teacher. I don't know how that's going to happen, but
Well, that's a great thought. That's absolutely wonderful to hear that. I'm so touched by your humble description of where you're coming from, and I think you set up an amazing example for your students, for the music community, and for Zen community. I think it's just one of the best stories. You are teaching at one of the best music department in the nation as well as in the world, and wearing so many hats. But meantime, still having time to share your thoughts, your love, your compassion to us here tonight. And I think I'm so fortunate to be your host and learn so much from you, that I think you are such a role model to all of us in the academia, as well as the community that support the mindfulness. We are so grateful to have you tonight, Frank.
Oh,
Thank you
my
so much.
pleasure. Thank you, Joanne.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I will. I'd like to talk a little bit about our next month's talk, and it is going to be March 19th, Friday, the third Friday night, 7 p.m. in the same website under Cafe 229, and I will be the speaker, and the title for the talk is Music Without Borders, a Pianist's Journey with Mindfulness. And I'll be performing, I'll be talking about how I apply mindfulness in my performances, in my teaching, and I'll be sharing my thoughts, ideas, poems, and the music with you live. Okay, thank you for joining us tonight, and I hope to see you next month. I'm Joanne Chang, and thank you for Dr. Frank Diaz for tonight.